Hello, my name is Beckett Rosenthal and I'm Curator of Australian Art to 1980 at the NGV. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I am presenting this talk on the lands of the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to pay my respect to their ancestors and elders, past and present, and to all First Nations peoples. As we are coming to you remotely today, I would also like to acknowledge that the people present here for today's talk may be on the lands of other traditional custodians, and I pay respect to those communities as well. Today, I will be speaking about the recent donation of 7 works which were included in the National Gallery of Victoria's 1968 exhibition, The Field, and also a 1968 Robert Hunter painting, all of which have been gifted to the NGV by donor Michael Machin and his family. The NGV's inaugural exhibition at its new premises on St Kilda Road in 1968 was The Field, the first comprehensive display of colour field painting and abstract sculpture in Australia. Regarded as a landmark exhibition in Australian art history, The Field was a radical presentation of 74 works by 40 artists who were primarily producing art that was flat, abstract, patterned, geometric, hard edge, or in the colour field style. So I'll give you a little bit of a background on colour field and hard edge painting. So originating in New York City during the 1940s and 1950s, the term colour field painting is used to describe the work of abstract artists whose work was typified by areas of solid colour, and these artists were privileging form over gesture and brushwork. With its origins in Los Angeles in the 1950s, hard edge painting is closely related to the colour field style. So you have a bit of a East Coast, West Coast thing going on, and was characterised by areas of flat colour with sharp, hard edges. And from the 1950s and into the 1960s, colour field and hard edge painting became more widespread, and you began to see, it featuring simple patterns, lines, and geometric shapes. So going back to The Field opened to much controversy, and the exhibition helped launch the careers of a generation of Australian artists. 18 of the exhibiting artists were under the age of 30, with Robert Hunter, the youngest, at just 21 years of age. The exhibition itself was filled with colour, and the silver foil covered walls and its geometric light fittings created a very dramatic backdrop for the large-scale paintings and sculptures that were on display. The Field marked a new direction for the NGV, one which was committed to the avant-garde. In 2018, the NGV mounted The Field Revisited, which recreated the Field exhibition for its 50th anniversary. By reassembling as many of the original 74 paintings and sculptures as possible, the restaging re-examined the exhibition's impact and significance for Australian art history and allowed a new generation to experience it for themselves. The exhibition was co-curated by director Tony Elwood and myself, and in the restaging, we tried to follow the original layout as closely as possible, as well as the design, and this included the silver walls, which you can see in these images. When we commenced working on the exhibition, well, the first thing we had to do was to begin tracking down the works. And of course, we started with our own collection, and the NGV held 3 works. So it was 3 works down and 71 to go. During the research stage, I was put in contact with Brisbane-based collector Michael Machin, who held in his own collection 7 field works. So that's 1/10 of the original exhibition, a huge collection of the works. Following the staging of the field revisited, Michael offered the works to the NGV through the Australian Government's Cultural Gift Program as a gift from himself and his family, a truly spectacular donation. So I'll just spend a little bit of time here going through the works which have come in through this gift, beginning with this work by David Aston. Aston was born in Bolton, England, and immigrated to Australia with his family in 1950. Following his first solo exhibition at Waters Gallery, Sydney in 1964, Aston came into prominence as an assertive and confident young artist of the Sydney avant-garde in the mid-1960s. Recognised for his hard edge and diamond-shaped canvases and for embracing new and experimental ideas, Aston had truly established his reputation by 1968 when he embarked on a series of large-scale colour-filled works entitled Field. Field 1 is painted on raw canvas and is split visually on the diagonal, the lower left half completely black and the top diagonal featuring 4 bands of colour. And this creates a wonderful balance and visual harmony in the work. Field 1 was one of 2 works by Aston which was selected for inclusion in the field. This next work here by Ian Byrne. Conceptual artist, curator and writer Ian Byrne studied at the National Gallery of Victoria Art School from 1961 to 62. He then worked in London before moving to New York City in 1967, where he collaborated with a fellow artist, Mel Ramsden, in the group Art and Language. In 1968, he was, of course, included in the field, and he was represented by 2 works, 4 Glass Mirror Piece, 1968, and this work here, 2 Glass Mirror Piece, both of which were commissioned by the NGV for the exhibition. And these works were made in Melbourne by the father of the Australian artist Paul Partos from instructions which were sent from New York by Ian Byrne. The reverse of 2 Glass Mirror Piece states, I certify that I consider this work is in no way unique and might be reproduced at any time or place by myself or any other person acting on my behalf or otherwise. Tony Colling was born in Warrnambool in Victoria and raised in Maffra, Gippsland, and he commenced studies at the East Sydney Technical School in 1958, and between 1960 and 62 he travelled throughout Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and New Zealand, working as a labourer. In 1963, Colling moved to London, where he studied painting and sculpture, and from 1964 to 1968, he worked as a theatrical decor, as well as a dealer in antiques and fine art, while at the same time also exhibiting his own work. While living in London, Colling began experimenting with plastics in his sculpture. The work on the left is a hanging installation which features 6 synthetic polymer resin discs of varying circumference, and attached to each disc are synthetic polymer resin or painted wood poles, and each pole varies in colour, length and circumference, and these forms are suspended from the ceiling at different heights. And on the right, we have the green synthetic polymer resin sculpture, which features long grass-like fronds which are arranged in a line. And these biomorphic fronds fall naturally to each side, which creates this effect of delicate grass being caught in a breeze. We have here this work by Michael Johnson, and Michael Johnson studied at the Julian Ashton Art School and East Sydney Technical College between 1953 and 59. In 1960, Johnson moved to London and he studied at the Centre School of Art. It was in London where he learned about the latest developments in post-war American art, which informed his interest in abstraction. Johnson began creating modular-shaped canvases in London in 1965. And at this time, he was experimenting with synthetic emulsion paints and beginning with polyvinyl acetate, which we go by PVA, and a glue product called Vinavil, which we mixed with the different paint pigments. Chomp 1966 is emblematic of Johnson's works produced in London, and the serrated saw-tooth edges enhance and enrich the painting's evocative title. On his return to Sydney in 1967, he held his first solo exhibition at Central Street Gallery, establishing himself as a leader of the new abstractionists. And in 1969, he represented Australia at the Sao Paulo Art Biennale in Brazil. Roland SCHLICHT was born on Ocean Island, now Banaba, part of the Gilbert and Ellice Islands. In 1939, his family left for England. However, they became stranded in South Africa when war broke out, and instead of arriving in Australia the same year, the family moved to England and instead arrived in Australia the same year. The family moved to England when SCHLICHT was a teenager, and he studied art at Winchester School of Art and architecture at the Kingston School of Art. He returned to Australia in 1966, where he became a key figure in the Central Street Gallery in Sydney. His works are highly ornamental, and decorative imagery was characteristic of his painting, and from expressive gestural movements to the more angular constructed geometric forms, which we see here in Dempsey, 1968. Ron Robertson-SWANN studied sculpture under Lyndon Dadswell at East Sydney Technical College. In 1962, he attended the St Martin's School of Art in London, where his teachers included Sir Anthony Caro and Philip King. Between 1963 and 1965, Robertson-SWANN worked as an assistant to British sculptor Henry Moore. He took up painting in the mid-1960s when he began by experimenting with stain painting techniques using oil paint, which was thinned with turpentine, before switching to acrylic paints. At this time, Robertson-SWANN was primarily known for his sculpture. However, he was represented in the field by 3 paintings, including this work here, Orange Oriole, which incorporated the stain painting technique. And these were sent over as they could be sent much more easily to Australia, rolled up in a canvas, rather than his 3-dimensional work. As I mentioned earlier, Robert Hunter was the youngest artist to participate in the NGV's landmark exhibition, The Field. And for this exhibition, he was represented by an all-white work. In a career spanning almost 5 decades, Hunter developed an idiosyncratic visual language that drew upon the logic of minimalism. Using a basic geometric lexicon and everyday materials such as house paint and masking tape, he endlessly reinvented the modernist grid. So from his earliest near white square canvases, the wall paintings that dominated much of his output in the 1970s, and the finely nuanced white-on-white compositions of the mature works for which he is now best known, Hunter produced a remarkably consistent body of work that tests the very limits of visual perception. This work here, untitled 1968, was included in Robert Hunter's solo exhibition at Tulano Gallery in 1968. And it's based on an implied grid of simple geometric forms and characterized by finely nuanced chromatic transitions. And so the works included in the exhibition established the guiding principles that would sustain the artist's entire career. And these paintings reflected a tendency toward hard-edged abstraction, which was prevalent in certain artistic circles in Melbourne at the time. And it also shows the influence of the monochromatic black paintings of Reinhardt, which Hunter first saw in the touring exhibition 2 Decades of American Painting, which was held at the NGV in 1967. With its black cross, This is a very unique piece in Hunter's body of work and a truly wonderful addition to the NGV's collection. The Field is a seminal exhibition in Australian art history, and this wonderful donation of works by field artists has provided the NGV the opportunity to expand the collection with works from this original exhibition. We currently have on display at NGV Australia a suite of these works from Michael Machin and his family, and I invite you all to come and visit NGV Australia at Federation Square to view these works on display. Thank you very much for joining me today.